I've always been a big fan of timelapses and hyperlapses, made both with traditional cameras and with drones. I have covered this subject with dozens of videos. In these videos I will focus on all the things you need to know to get the best possible quality in timelapses and hyperlapses, made with drones or with regular cameras. I will also explain the difference between timelapses and hyperlapses, and in which situation is better to choose a technique instead of the other one. The tricks I will show you here apply to any sort of drone, as long as they have a mode like timed shots, basically an intervalometer. Most of them also applies to timelapse hyperlapses made with regular cameras, although with drones there are some specific issues that I will point out. If you're interested in drone or timelapses, don't hesitate to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. There is often some confusion about the two terms, so let me explain the difference. In timelapses, the photos are taken with a static point of view. A hyperlapse is exactly the same thing, but in this case the point of view will be in motion. With a traditional ground-based camera, it is very easy to use a tripod to have a perfectly stable, fixed point of view. So most of the time we tend to shoot time-lapses. Performing a hyperlapse with a traditional camera is not simple, as we need to find a way to move the camera around. The best results are obtained with sliders, but they are bulky to carry around, and anyway only allow for a short movement and must be motorized to get a constant distance between each shot. At times we can get good results from trains, cars or buses. Another possibility is to use a handheld gimbal or to shoot from a moving boat. But in both cases we have to cope with a good deal of other unwanted movements. Not easy. In low winds, drones can be very stable while advancing forward or sideways, and this makes them perfectly suitable for hyperlapses, like huge sliders in the sky. For this reason, with drones, people generally tend to go for hyperlapses. But it is also possible to keep a drone hovering in a static position and take simple time lapses, although it is not as stable as a camera on a tripod, so we have to cope with some warping due to small movement of the drone, as we will see later. Like video in general, timelapses and hyperlapses need a scene with some sort of movement. Otherwise, a simple photo, maybe animated, is more interesting. They are both very interesting techniques, but each of them is best suited for some specific situations. Hyperlapses are excellent to add movement to an otherwise static scene, or else to give an idea of frantic urban life, of excitement or confusion. But when a scene already contains some sort of interesting movement, timelapses are often the best way to focus on what is happening. It may be the case of a sunset, or cloud movement, or cars in a city, boats in a river, and so on. To make a static time-lapse more exciting, it is also possible to add a bit of extra movement in post-production. By zooming in or out, or moving sideways, or adding a mixture of both, basically applying the famous can burn effect. Or else we can use some other tricks, like hyper zoom, freeze frame, a bit of shift of colors, or even adding external moving elements. Okay, this time maybe I went a bit too far. In timelapses or hyperlapses, we take a series of photos at a given frequency. These photos are then assembled in a video timeline. The frequency in video is generally either 24 or 25 or 30 frames per second. For our purposes, I will use here as an example 30 frames per second, because it makes it easier to figure out the time needed, even though I tend to use a 24 frames per second timeline. First of all, we need to choose the number of photos we need, based on the desired length of the time-lapse. In my case, I often need a length between 10 and 15 seconds, unless I'm shooting sunset or sunrises in Northern Europe or Canada, in which case I prefer 20 to 30 seconds. When using a drone, we have to cope with a limited battery life, so we will focus on a time-lapse of about 10 seconds. If we take 300 photos and insert it in a 30 frame per second timeline, the time-lapse will play back in 10 seconds, as 300 divided by 30 equals 10. While in a timeline of 24 frames per second, we will get about 12.5 seconds. This length is perfectly fine for our purposes. Another reason why I like to use 300 photos is because it makes it very easy to compute the shooting time. At a frequency of 1 shot per second, it will take 300 seconds, which divided by 60 seconds per minute equals 5 minutes. Therefore, at the frequency of 1 shot every 2 seconds, it will take 10 minutes. At 1 shot every 3 seconds, 15 minutes, and so on. Another important item to plan according to the scene and the result we want to achieve is the frequency of shots. The longer the time between each shot, the faster will be the movement in the resulting time-lapse. With drones, the shorter possible frequency is generally 2 shots per second, as the camera needs a few milliseconds to buffer the shot. But in some model, if we want to use RAW files, the minimum frequency can be up to 1 shot every 5 seconds. Which is annoying, as we indeed want to use RAW files. For the longest frequency, we need to consider the battery life of the drone you're using. In most cases, we can count on about 20 minutes, which gives us the possibility to use a frequency of one photo every 4 seconds. If really needed, we can use a frequency of one shot every 5 seconds, but taking only 250 photos for a final time lapse of about 8 to 9 seconds. A frequency of one shot every 2 to 4 seconds is fine for scenes containing people, cars, boats. One shot every 3 to 5 seconds for scene where the main movement comes from cloud. A shot every 5 seconds is fine for sunset or sunrises in Southern Europe. Another important choice to be made before shooting is the correct shutter speed. In regular video, it is often suggested to use the so-called 100-degree rule, which consists in using a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second when using 24 or 25 frames per second, or 1/60th of a second when using 30 frames per second. The idea behind is that the relation between shutter speed and frame per second control motion blur, and the correct amount of motion blur is extremely important. It makes or breaks a time lapse. I have made a specific in-depth video on how to control motion blur. If you're interested in time lapses or hyperlapses, I suggest watching it. There should be a link on screen now. In time-lapses, ideally we want to use a shutter speed of 1 second when shooting at a frequency of one photo every 2 seconds. A shutter speed of 1.5 seconds when shooting at one photo every 3 seconds. And a shutter speed of 2 seconds with a frequency of a photo every 4 seconds, and so on. As you can see, with the correct speed, all the moving elements in the time-lapse flow in a perfectly smooth way. In order to use such a low shutter speed, we need ND filters. They act like sunglasses, simply reducing the amount of light entering the sensor. For time-lapses, a very high value is needed, like 256 or 512. ND filters are available for any DJI drone, often sold in sets with different values. With a traditional camera sitting on a sturdy tripod, using very long shutter speed is simple. But a drone hovering in the sky is not as stable, so we have to somehow compensate. I find that a shutter speed of 1/6 of a second is safe, and it works correctly in all circumstances. In low winds, with a well-calibrated drone, it is possible to push the speed up to 1 second for better results. Let me show you a few examples of what happens when shooting at a totally wrong shutter speed. In those cases I was not using ND filters, so I was forced to go with a very fast shutter speed. As you can see, the resulting time lapses are all over the place. Ouch! It really hurts the eyes. When shooting time-lapses with drones, the main obstacle we encounter is warping. In several occasions, part of the time-lapse or hyperlapse seems to move independently from the rest of the scene. This is due to two different factors. A drone hovering is not as stable as a camera on a tripod, even in light winds. If your drone is drifting severely, I recommend to perform all the calibration needed, especially the IMU, and the vision sensors, as they reduce the amount of drifting of the aircraft while hovering. Another factor is the amount of distortion of the individual photos. Most drones are equipped with wide-angle lenses, and the amount of distortion is generally much higher than in photos taken with regular cameras, equipped with longer lenses. A couple of days ago I took my Mavic 2 Pro for a time-lapse of Mount Etna at sunrise. This is the scene. In most cases at sunrise there are very interesting cloud formation around the mountain. Also, in previous days we had some volcano activity and I was hoping for something to happen. In this sort of time-lapses we don't know what will happen in the next 20 minutes, so we have to hope for the best. But I was out of luck and nothing happened, so I ended up with a dull result. But even worse, the drone was shifting a lot, and as you can see the result is a big mess. I had not used the 2 Pro for several weeks, and I needed all sorts of calibrations. You can see that after stabilizing there is a huge amount of warping, with the edge of the scene moving a lot compared to the center. The next day I received a message from a friend saying that Mount Etna had gone crazy with activity. I had not yet done the calibrations, but I put the drone up in the sky and the scene was quite spectacular. As you can see, once again there was a huge amount of warping. After spending a good amount of time post-processing and stabilizing, I ended up with something almost acceptable. But the result would have been so much better if the drone was properly calibrated. I made a second one immediately after. Again, I managed to rescue something, but the result was still pretty poor. The next day I tried with my Mini 2 perfectly calibrated, and as you can see, with the drone set up properly, the result can be quite good. There is just a little bit of warping, but it can be easily sorted in post-processing. Timelapses and hyperlapses are extremely interesting techniques to perform both with ground-based camera and drones, something between photography and video. Let me know in the comment below if you're interested in a video about how to post-process timelapses and hyperlapses. If you're interested in these topics, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. Bye for now.